And I was thinking it's kind of a wild thing to be fully ourselves, right? You don't know
It
where it's
is,
going to take you
but it
when
feels
you do that.
very beautiful. So I highly recommend it. If we go in pursuit of a life of purpose, we are much more likely to find joy along the way.
I feel like with women, it kind of goes one of two ways, right? Where we have to like shrink to try to fit in, or we have to really push ourselves to fit in.
There's no hack. We've got to do this important work of uncovering your values, identifying your aptitudes. If you're still breathing, you got time to do it.
Welcome to Hello, I'm Bossy. We're here today with Suzy Welch, who teaches a wildly successful NYU class, Becoming You. She's the director of the NYU Stern Initiative on Purpose and Flourishing. She's written 3 New York Times bestsellers and Wall Street Journal bestsellers, and has just written a new book, which I will personally say I absolutely love, Becoming You, which is highly underlined and so many note takings. And I did all of the questionnaires on it and everything. Really enlightening. So thank you so much for joining us today.
So happy to be here. Thank you.
To start off, you've lived multiple lives,
That's what
it
people
feels
say to you
like.
when you're old. That's what they say. Okay. It's like, I'm just a person who's lived. So, yes, it's true. I
You've
mean,
been a journalist,
yeah,
right?
right. And
Mother.
then journalism went away, right? Okay. Yeah. Mother for sure.
You were a widow,
Yeah.
which
I am
was
a
a
widow.
defining moment for
Yep.
you. A business leader.
Hmm.
You're a teacher now at NYU.
Hmm.
Um, was there a moment in your life where you felt like you had to shrink to be accepted? Or did you always feel like you had to try to expand yourself more to be accepted? I feel like with women, it kind of goes one of two ways, right? Where we have to like shrink to try to fit in, or we have to really push ourselves to fit in.
I have to say, I never really thought about shrinking or expanding. I think it's an interesting construct. I definitely have the language I might use would be, have there are, I think in terms of values, of personal values, and there are definitely times where I lived my values more fully,
Hmm.
and other times where I had to not express my values because I had obligations. I had children, and I just had responsibilities, and you can't always go and live your values fully. So maybe that's with the shrinking for sure. I mean, I think
Hmm.
that's just what it is to be a woman and for sure it's true of some men as well, but I mean, culturally and societally that this burden falls a little bit more on women's shoulders because we tend to be the caregivers. And so for sure, there were times where I was not able to fully express my full desires, wants, needs, and desires because of love, really, in many ways, because I loved my husband, I loved my children, in some cases, I loved my coworkers, and I couldn't move as quickly as I wanted to make
Hmm.
changes and so forth. So yeah, I think that that is the story of our lives for sure.
Because you talk in your book about the period where, and I have my own special connection to your late husband, with my family being involved in GE since Edison and Schenectady, right? And
Mhm.
people were always saying my daughter was going to be the next Jack. And after reading your book, I kind of cringe at that because you hear all these stories about people and their expectations for their
Yeah.
kids
Yeah.
and all of this. But but you talk about being a widow and going into the woods after. And it totally reminded me of Thoreau and Walden when
Yeah.
he said, I went into the woods because I wished to live deliberately.
Yeah.
And you
Well, I
had
didn't go
this
to the woods to
moment,
live deliberately. Like I went into the woods because first of all, it was in the middle of COVID and
right?
everybody was sort of gone to the woods. And I went with my family literally to the woods. We went to upstate New York and we were all living together. Um, And I went to the woods because I needed to hear myself think. I didn't know what I thought anymore. I went from being part of a couple and that being my entire identity, as it is for so many people who are married.
Right.
It's not just women, it's men too. And I had to figure out who I was going to be alone. And the woods is where I mean, I do think my impulse was, okay, how do I live now? How do I do that? And to the woods I went.
And you talk in your book as well, right at the very beginning, that it's not another happiness book. It's not another
Yeah.
book about happiness. And I absolutely love that. But do you think that we can ever be fully happy if we're not our full becoming you, living in our our
Area of
space of
transcendence.
transcendent, area of transcendence?
Well, I think that happiness is an outcome. I don't think happiness is a goal at all. I resist that notion of happiness being something that we can find sort of independent, like it's a treasure chest someplace and we're going to go find that happiness box. I think that happiness is an outcome of a meaningful, productive life, and that often is how we find happiness, but we don't always, because we can have a meaningful and productive life and we can get sick, or a child can go off the rails or whatever. And so I think there's no guarantees of happiness. I think it's kind of short-sighted to chase happiness per se. But I think
Hmm.
if we go in pursuit of a life of purpose, we are much more likely to find joy along the way. But again, it's a fleeting thing. And anybody who's ever been happy will tell you that happiness is not a terminal state. It's
Right,
an intermittent state. And I mean, maybe that's why it's just so sweet, is that when you have it, you understand that something's coming for it almost
right.
always. Yeah. I think our values don't really change. How much we get to express them changes. I think our aptitudes are pretty stable. Our
Hmm.
interests might shift. So I do think it's becoming used as a methodology to help you figure out your purpose. But you're right. It's not an end game. You don't do it once and forget about it. You kind of go back to it and you tweak it and you return to it. You reflect on it. You go try some stuff. You go back to it. It's a way of thinking about living your purpose.
And so when you were a journalist,
Mhm.
was that your area of transcendence for that moment? Or were you still kind of figuring all of that out? Because you talk in the book about being really happy doing it, and you seemed very happy in all the different things that you did. Um,
Well, I'm generally a happy, cheerful person. So I have that always going for me, and that I'm a
yeah,
generally lighthearted, upbeat person. I think um, one of the things I explain in the book is that when I was a journalist, I had a lot of fun. It was very exciting, and it definitely was a match for some of my values. I have a very high value of scope, meaning I want an exciting life. I have a high value of radius, meaning I'd like to make change in the world. I have a high value of achievement, which is pretty self-explanatory.
Mhm.
But I also have a high value of belonging, which is the friendship and love value. And while I was a journalist, I had a great deal of discomfort with how journalists had to often be mean to other people. They were critical of other people, sometimes hypocritically, but they were always kind of on the outside looking in, sort of
right.
pointing out the flaws of society. And I was kind of a person who sort of believed that everybody was a little bit gray and we should all just get along and stop judging each other. And I wasn't in the judging business. I understood, I mean, I happen to be a Christian, and I just understood the only person I'm supposed to judge is me. And I
Yeah.
didn't like all the judging that journalists did by nature of the trade. And so I did have a really big values conflict, and it all came to a head when I was covered to assign the Space Shuttle Challenger. And I was my assignment was to after the horrible tragedy
Yeah.
occurred where the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up, I was assigned to go sit on the front lawn of Krista McAuliffe's parents' house and take photo and ask them questions with the photographer as they went in. There was a mob of reporters there. And I turned to the photographer who I was with and I said, I can't do it. It's too mean. And he said, they're going to fire you if you don't do this. And I had this gigantic moment of truth where I said, I don't mind if I'm fired for this. I'll be fired for this. And it was a values conflict. And I have nothing against the reporters who stood there and did that. They were, the reason why they exist is because people want to read that. I just couldn't be part of it. It wasn't my values. And so I don't begrudge them. I read the newspaper. I read, partake in journalism. I just knew it wasn't my area of transcendence. There was something else for me. And when I discovered business, I was like, oh, okay, here's actually an enterprise that overlaps with my aptitudes, what I'm good at, but also allows me to be part of community.
Yeah.
And and has a different kind of culture. You're not sitting in judgment, you're trying to build stuff. And so I knew that I needed to make a shift over to a different industry. While I had fun and certainly enjoyed journalism, there were just parts of it that were definitely not aligned with my values. And the whole point of Becoming You is to help you find that work that is aligned with both your values and your aptitudes and then also your interests. And so it's a real iterative process. I mean, I didn't have You in those days. It would have certainly sped things up if I did.
Hmm. I think that the part that surprised me the most was I'm a religious person, so I thought I knew my values going into the book. And then you take the survey that you have on your website,
Right.
and I was surprised.
Religions teach virtues, and virtues
That's
are
true.
something totally different. So this is the big misunderstanding, and you're incredibly in the 99.9% of all people who mix these two concepts up.
Yeah.
All virtues are good by definition, and most religions have virtues associated with them: kindness, fairness, generosity, uh, helping people, and so forth. And so we all know those things, but they're not values, they're virtues, and we should all have more of them. Okay. Values are choices that we get to make. They're neither good nor bad. They're personal choices about how we want to live, how we want to interact with people, how much we want to work. And they're individual choices about things that affect how we show up and manifest ourselves in the world, totally separate from virtues. Now, we are judging each other's values all the time because people judge,
Right.
but they're not virtues. So you're right. The one thing that the values bridge tests for is how central your faith is to you. That's the only thing it does that's related to religion. And for me,
Hmm.
it was my number one value was cosmos, is what we call it, because we want to make sure that all faith traditions are included for those who take the test. But it doesn't, you can be um, in almost any faith tradition, and fairness is a value. Is a
Hmm.
virtue. Let's just say in every faith tradition, fairness is a virtue. But you can be any religion at all and have wildly different actual values, okay, while all holding the same virtue.
Hmm. And maybe that's what I was surprised at the most
Mhm.
was that I didn't know what values were,
Well,
maybe.
take a number, okay?
Yeah.
Because nobody does. I mean, I have research that shows we did research. It was only 2,000 data points, but that's enough, I think, for this.
Yeah.
And it showed that only 17% of people even came close to being able to define a value. And we gave them a very broad swath. I mean, it wasn't like we were holding them to the academic definition. If they came
Right.
close, we counted it. And it was only 17%. And if I'd really been counting harder, it would have been closer to 10%. And only 7% of people, when we asked them to list their values, actually had a complete list of what values are. Most people, 93% included mainly virtues and personality traits.
Right.
And, it's kind of a crime that we're not taught what values are in middle school. And there's just, I think the problem is it's kind of a third rail in our culture, in that um, people are scared to talk about values because they've been very politicized: family values, Christian values, progressive values, conservative values, all these other things. And everybody's
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm not talking about that. But in fact, when you get down to what values really are, which are decisions about how we live and show up, we could talk about those, all the time without judging. It's just a language thing. And, one of the reasons that I loved writing Becoming You and I love talking about Becoming You is I think it could really help people have better conversations about what matters to them without it getting all mucked up with judgment and politics.
And I think the book to me, we started this podcast because my daughter was called Bossy at
Mhm.
school by a teacher. And it kind of morphed into this, not women in leadership positions, so to speak, but because you talk about that in your book as well, right? We're not all called to be
Yeah, we're not
leaders.
all leaders. We're just not.
Right.
We don't have the skills or the traits or the values to be leaders. Not all of us,
Yeah.
but we're all told we should be leaders. I mean,
Right.
the minute the thing you live for when your kid goes to school is for a teacher to say to you, "Oh, your little Johnny's a leader," and you're
Yeah.
like, "I've done a good job," but it's not. I learned a lot when I had my third son, my third child, my second son, was a fantastic swimmer in high school. And of course, I had this plan for him to go to great college. And I said to him, look, you got to become captain of the team. And he said, he kind of didn't really show a lot of interest in that. And he continued to swim really well. And I was like, this is not enough. You got to become captain of the team. And one day he looked at me, and said, I don't want to be captain. I don't want to be a leader, Mom. And I felt like I'd been kicked in the stomach because I had swallowed the doctrine that everyone
Right.
should be a leader. And it was a great, I'm grateful to him because I thought that's right. He's not a leader. He's a wonderful partner to people. He's a collaborator. He's a creator, but he doesn't want to lead people. And that's not for everyone. It's hard and it's not, doesn't play to his strengths.
Yeah.
And he's gone on to have, actually did end up going to a great college, and he has gone on to have a wonderful career where he does a lot of wonderful things. He works with his wife. They're complete co-partners in their business. But I will tell you this, he had a brief stint after he graduated from college where he was put into a leadership role and he bombed. He didn't want to do it. He hated it and he wasn't very good at it. And
Yeah.
one day he just basically went to the boss and said, please demote me and let me be a member of the team. This is not for me. And so one of the contentions of becoming you is when you're figuring out your value, figuring out your aptitudes, not your values,
Yeah.
but your aptitudes, have an honest, do an honest assessment. We've got a free test called Career Traits Compass on my website, SuzyWelch.com, where you can find out where you are on the continuum from individual contributor to leader. Let that data set you free.
Yeah.
Now, the good news is if you come out with a score that says, okay, you're an individual contributor, you can change it. There's things you can learn. You can learn to make better decisions. You can learn to have more edge. You can learn to be more radically candid. You can learn to increase your curiosity. There's a lot of things you can do to move you up that continuum on leadership aptitudes. But or you could just look at it and say, I am who I am, and I'm going to be the best individual contributor that I can be.
Yeah. And I think your book really is the foundation. The term bossy we use, but really I think of it as living an authentic life and doing what you were put on this earth to do and being unapologetic about whatever that is as a woman, as a man, but normally it's women who are called bossy more than men are. And your book seems like this foundational piece for that. I don't think that you can really do what we were put on this earth to do, which is a myriad of different things for each person, without this fully knowing yourself piece that you talk about. And I was wondering, what would you tell someone about how to claim their power? Like what would you tell someone if they asked you, like, how do I become this authentic self, living in this area of transcendence where it's your values and your aptitudes and, the financially,
Economically viable and just
economic.
I think you are fully self-actualized when you're living your purpose. Okay. So I think for some people, um, bossiness is a term that is used when people have a value of high, what we call agency, self-determination. They want to be in control of all the outcomes. If you want to be in control of all the decisions and their outcomes, then you're very high on the agency value. I
Mhm.
happen to be extremely low on it. I don't have very high agency. I'm very, very collaborative. I like consensus. I tend to try to bring everybody to the table and find shared solutions. And not everybody is like that. Your daughter probably has extremely high agency. I think that the thing about agency is that you've got to find work that allows you to express how much you have. So I've got low agency, but I run an organization and I'm constantly needing to push myself to show more leadership because my team wants it. But if you are a person with high agency like your daughter, she needs to make sure that she finds work environments and life environments where she can fully express her agency without it silencing the people around her.
Mhm.
And the thing about people with high agency is look, a lot of the greatest creators in the world, some of the greatest leaders in the world, some of the most impactful people in history obviously had extremely high agency because they really cared about the outcomes in the details, and that's why the outcomes that they want, like Joan of Arc, clearly had very
Yeah.
high agency, for instance. Okay, so um, but uh, but the work, the challenge for the people with very high agency is to understand a lot of things get done through people as well. And you want to make sure that you can balance your agency with other people's agency.
Yeah.
You got a lot of people with high agency in the room. The teacher who called your daughter Bossy probably had high agency herself, and what she saw was
Yeah.
somebody who was trying to control the outcomes. And when we understand the values about how we want to show up in the world, we're just so much better at doing it in a way that has delicacy and nuance.
Yeah. How do you think one learns how to do that piece?
Yeah, well, the world will teach you. Okay, because if you're doing it in a way that is ineffective, the results will come back in your face. Like,
Hmm.
if you are, say you're an adult leader and you've got so much agency that you just silence everyone around the table and you're the one who makes all the decisions, the good people will leave. And you'll
Yeah.
say, oh, when I get another good person in this room, I'm going to let them speak their piece. I'm going to consider them. I'm going to sublimate some of my agency because I can never keep anybody good on my team if I'm just uh, um, too uh, too determined to control all the outcomes. So, or you can just become an entrepreneur where in a one person company where you do make all the decisions. But at the end of the day, you're going to have a customer. You can't
Right.
have a business without a customer, and they're going to want to control the outcomes as well. So the world teaches you pretty quickly.
And then, you talk about how one of the bravest things that we can do is to, I don't want to say pivot, but change direction
Yeah.
sometimes
Well, we
in
have to. The
our
world
life.
changes, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we're brave and sometimes we're just surviving.
Thrust into it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what advice would you have for someone that's been performing in the wrong lane, in the wrong life, like living
Yeah.
someone else's
Life. I mean,
life?
I see it every single day. I mean, look, when I do my open enrollment 3-day workshops of Becoming You in New York, the room, we have a very large lecture hall, and I'm going to say that 90% of the people there have encountered Becoming You, either heard about it or found it because they are realizing that they're living a kind of a B plus life, that they are writing, put it another way, that they're writing the story of their life with their non-dominant hand. It's like they've got the pen in their not their dominant hand, and they're sitting there and they're trying to write the story, and it just isn't as good as it could be because they're not playing to their values or their aptitudes. They're economically violent. So people, I find this is who I encounter 90% of the time, and I say, okay, there's no hack for getting to the place we need you to go and that you want to go and that life would be better if you went. There's no hack. We've got to do this important work of uncovering your values, identifying your aptitudes, and pinpointing your economically viable interests. That is what that third piece is, the parts of the economy that are growing and thriving, but also call you emotionally and intellectually and can pay you what you want to be paid. And that's, for some people, that's a huge number of industries and roles. And for other people, it's like two, it's pharmaceuticals and aviation. It's like, it's HR only. And so that's fine, but you've got to sort of line up all those data sets and then look at where the overlap is. And I wish I could say it's a hack. I've definitely had students say to me, like, can't you just make an AI of this process? And I'm like, unfortunately, no, human discernment still comes into it. But maybe that's not forever. I mean, maybe someday AI will be able to do all of this and I'll be out of a job, but that's okay. I'll adopt another dog. So I think that there is no easy way to figure out our purpose. Just this slow, deliberate discovery.
I gave a copy of your book to my father, who's turning 80 this year. And he was saying, well, I'm retired, right? So I don't need to figure out what I'm going to
Oh,
do for my next job. He said, but he still wanted to figure out how to live his most authentic life
right,
for the
right.
rest of the time
Yeah.
that he had. And I was thinking, it's never too late. Part of me was like, well, how late is too late to start doing this?
78 is the oldest person I've done Becoming You with, and maybe your dad will go. Look, it's not about, I mean, there's no while you're still among us, I mean, it doesn't have to be about careers. I mean, I've definitely had people come to my open enrollment who say, I don't work. I'm never going to work. My husband works or I'm retired or whatever. And they want to understand what their values are so that they can live authentically. There's no, use by date on that. If you're still breathing, you got time to do it. And so that, people gravitate to the values work in the book because it's applicable to absolutely every single person walking on planet Earth.
Yeah. It was fascinating to me to think that, he was questioning if he knew what all of his values
Yeah,
were. And
unlikely. Yeah,
yeah, and it was fascinating because, he's been a radiologist for years and he loved it. And so like he found the job, right, that he was
right.
like meant to do. But then thinking about, he was saying he'd been wondering if he'd been living authentically
Did he
this
take
whole
the
time.
values bridge? He should go to the valuesbridge.com
No,
and
I told him
yes.
about your website though. I told him because after I took it, I was like, you have to take
Yeah, send him a
this.
link to the valuesbridge.com. He's got to take the test and he'll know in
Yeah.
22 minutes if he's been living an authentic life. It typically takes people between 15 and 20 minutes to take the test, sometimes less, and then 2 minutes later they get back their results, sort of in under half an hour. You can know. And
Yeah.
it gives you a score on how authentically you're living, as you know. So you'll find out. I mean, you'll get an actual score. So
Yeah. Thank you so much for jumping on this call with me
I
today
am
to talk
very
about.
appreciative of your time and your engagement with the ideas. I really appreciate it. And I love what
No,
you're doing.
it's like I said, it's a fantastic book. You talk about Mary Oliver is a favorite of mine, and what will we do with this one wild and precious life? And and I was thinking it's kind of a wild thing to be fully ourselves, right? You don't know
It
where it's
is.
going to take you
Yeah, we
when
don't, but it
when
feels
you do that.
very beautiful. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Have a
You're
wonderful
welcome.
rest
All
of your
right.
day.
You too.